This is Franchise Today, brought to you by FRM Solutions, providers of the best-in-class software solutions for franchise relationship management. Franchise Today is your destination for weekly information, conversations, and interviews with accomplished industry leaders, all of whom share best practices for sustainable growth and sensible franchising. Here now, your host, Stan Friedman, to kick off this week's podcast.
Today is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. I'm Stan Friedman, and this is Franchise Today. Well, here comes the annual IFA convention, creeping up on us with less than 2 weeks to go, and the same is true for Super Bowl. And as of this recording, my Buffalo Bills are still in the mix. I know that believing that they could make it past the Chiefs on their home turf this week is a tall order, but if the officials on the field and the NFL play it straight, it feels to me like that time has finally come and that a new page in NFL history is ready to be turned. We'll see, won't we? And we'll know soon enough, as I'm recording this less than 3 hours in front of kickoff in Kansas City. Go Bills! New topic. Many thanks to Nick Lopez, founder and steward of Lime Painting, for a command performance here last week. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in Las Vegas at the IFA convention, Nick, and can't thank you enough for all the take-home value you delivered to the audience right here last week on Franchise Today. Today's interview is with Peach Cobbler Factory's franchise founder and CEO Greg George, another longtime veteran in franchise development, and in some cases despite himself, as you will hear today. And the interview takes a very surprising turn toward the end, which leads this conversation into becoming a two-parter. So stay into the very end in order to make sense of it all. And with that said, a quick reminder to visit us at www.franchisetodaypodcast.com to drop me notes and guest suggestions. Download or stream hundreds of interviews with franchising icons dating back 15 plus years. You can also find us at Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, and virtually anywhere anyone goes to chase podcasts. That includes asking Siri, Alexa, or Hey Google to play the latest episode of Franchise Today. Okay, enough of the housekeeping. It's time to pay some bills with a quick commercial break, and I'll be back in 2 minutes or less with Peach Cobbler Factory CEO and co-owner Greg George. Stick around. This story is as unique as it is inspiring. I guarantee it.
Franchise Today will be right back, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Franchise Today is brought to you by Profit Keeper, the #1 franchise analytics platform for franchisors and franchisees, trusted by more than 150 brands and 50,000 franchisees. Profit Keeper connects KPI, benchmark, and royalty data from your locations, groups, and territories. With Profit Keeper, you see stats in real time, presented simply and graphically. This makes it easy to identify actionable information for franchisees to help them drive profitability and brand growth at the unit level. No more wrangling data and guessing what works and what doesn't. To learn more and to get started, visit profitkeeper.com/franchise today. Greg George is a rainmaker and a natural-born salesman with franchise development as his area of expertise. Driven by the pursuit of his goals, both personally and professionally, he lives life sharing how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. Greg is the self-proclaimed Mr. Positive, truly believing that positive thinking plus positive living equals positive results. He's a family man who loves spending time with his 3 sons and has been to over 40 Kentucky Derbies in his life and loves University of Louisville sports. His goal in life is to simply help others find their true gifts, as he's been fortunate enough to do for himself. His biggest accomplishment in life is his sobriety and raising 3 sons. So, Greg, tell us where you were and what you were doing when franchising bit you and changed your life?
It was, a little longer, I believe, than 10 years ago. But I was involved with a company called the Fuzzy Peach. It was 3, at the time, 19-year-old kids that started this concept when the frozen yogurt craze was upon us. And a friend of mine recruited me to go meet with them. I met with them. At the time, they had 5 locations. And, we grew the company to about 60 locations in short order. They were bought out by the Great American Chocolate Company for several $1 million. And that's kind of when you laid your eyes on me on social media. And here we are many years later.
So I remember seeing pictures of you at Churchill Downs, all the time that you were a big fan of the track.
Yeah, well, I'm not necessarily a big gambler, but I have been actually to 40 Kentucky Derbies. I started when I was 13 years old, and I got the fever as a kid, and I just this past year in 2024 went to my 40th Kentucky Derby. And so I'm let's just say an ambassador for the Kentucky Derby. It's something I do, something I believe I'm known for. And actually this year I was very lucky. Again, I'm not a big gambler, but I have quite a story to tell, maybe for another time. But let's just say I hit a big lick. I probably made more money than the guy that trained the winner this year. So I'm very blessed in that regard.
So the suits and all the bright colored clothing that's associated with the Derby is a year-round event for you, but is that where all that was born? Was the idea for that born there?
Well, I mean, the Kentucky Derby, when I was a kid, when I went there, it really didn't matter what you wore, because I was in the infield and the tickets cost $20, I believe, when I first started going to the Kentucky Derby. Well, seats where I sit now, they're along the lines of $65,000 per seat. So if I'm going to pay that much money to go to an event like that, I'm sure as hell going to look good. So it's just evolved over the years, and every year, I bring something different to the wardrobe scene, and it's just my nature. I'm slightly flamboyant, so to speak. I've been called, many people have called me many things over the years, but, I have a little Willy Wonka in me, let's just put it that way.
All right, so let's go back to when you were doing franchising at first at the Fuzzy Peach. What brought you to franchising? What did you do before you discovered or before franchising actually discovered you? What was your life about before that?
Well, actually, I stumbled into franchising now. It's been, let's see, I'm coming up on my 23rd year in franchising. And what led me to it was, prior to entering the franchise industry, I would design and build. It started with designing and building when the cigar industry was really hot, designing, building cigar lounges. And when the government, kind of put the halts on smoking indoors and cigars in general, I just pivoted to the coffee and food game on design and build and furnishing these facilities. And one of my clients that had multiple locations, he kept bugging me. He knew that I could, sell ice to Eskimos, and he just kept bugging me and bugging me and bugging me. And he said, look, I'm starting this franchise in a little beach town called Wilmington, North Carolina. I've got my act together, my back office together, my financials together, my partnership together, the resources, and there's nobody I would rather have get involved with me than you. And I'm like, wait a minute, if I get involved in franchising, it's going to put me out of business, because I was designing and building and furnishing equipment, so on and so forth. And so he convinced me to come to Wilmington, North Carolina and have an interview. And I went in there, and by the time I got home the next day, there was an offer waiting at me at my doorstep via FedEx, and I accepted it. I packed up from where I was living at the time in Destin, Florida, and I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, and started my career in the year 2000 in Wilmington, North Carolina, and started out with a coffee concept called Port City Java. And that's where I cut my teeth, so to speak.
I remember Port City Java. And North Carolina, as I recall, is where you were living when I used to see your Facebook posts all the time. So it's someplace in those early days that I was at least aware of you before I got to know more about you.
Sure.
So what came after Port City, and how long did you spend there, and what came next?
Well, I spent approximately 2 years there, and, it was my first dive into the world of franchising. I didn't know that much about it back then, but I was quite successful. And the more successful I got, the more I said to myself, wait a minute, if I can do this for this particular brand, maybe I can do it for more than one brand. And, just one day I decided, you know what, I'd saved some money. I was going to hang my own sign, and I was going to create a consulting company where I work with startup franchises, and that I would represent the franchisor. Normally, over the years, I've touched well over 40 brands, and where I could use my skill set to help not existing franchise companies, but startups, folks that they had a great concept, but they didn't know how to take it to the next level. And that's what happened. I hung my sign. I remember the name of my company back then was called the Empire Builders. It's just a name I came up with. And I just started out by myself, and I brought on a few startup franchises, had some success, built up to where I had 8 or 9, I was a one-man operation back then, 8 or 9 brands. And, quite frankly, at that time, I was a franchise salesman. That's what I did. And boy, I learned everything in the world. I learned what not to do in franchising over those next several years. I had quite a career. I've helped many, many concepts that were startups or they may have had 1 or 2 or 3 locations, but the owners knew how to make food, but they didn't know how to scale. And over the years, I've learned how to scale, how to scale and how not to scale.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between operating and scaling. And anybody who's been around long enough knows that if you didn't know that coming in, it didn't take long to find out that if you're an emerging franchisor and you're trying to operate your growing business at the same time as you're trying to scale it, you've got 2 40-hour-a-week jobs there, and which one are you going to put priority on? Because you can't do them both well.
You're on point there for sure.
So you were kind of like an early stage, what we call FSOs today, right? Franchise sales organizations. You were doing that before it was cool.
Yeah, I guess you'd say that. I mean, you're right. I've always had the magic touch when it comes to communication, being able to present things in the proper manner. It's done me well over the years.
So take us to the next milestone. What came after? How long did you do that before you made a change again?
Well, again, I've evolved. Let's just put it that way. I had young kids at that time. I was a single father, and I worked with multiple concepts over a 15-year period. And as I grew, as I gained more knowledge, as I understood there's more to franchising than selling a franchise. You've got to have your real estate together. You've got to have your marketing together. You've got to have your legal together. You've got to have your financing. You've got to have infrastructure. As I started learning all those things and, started gaining some wisdom about the industry, as I got further into it, I went, wait a minute. I started looking at some of these companies I was working with and started seeing the ownership team drive fancier cars, buy bigger houses, get bigger bank accounts. And I said to myself, wait a minute, there's got to be more. And I started out, I remember when I was even scared to do it, but I remember one of my first proposals, I said, I only want 1/2 of 1% of the royalty stream. And I remember that was a big deal to me back then. And so I got where I was on, part of the royalty stream on some of these concepts. And, I furthered my career with that. And, normally in my world, I would last about 2 years with a brand. And then after 2 years, when the company became successful and, had grown, generally the ownership bought me out of my contract. And I would go and reinvent myself with another brand. And, that's how I operated for 10 to 15 years. I would last until the company got up and going and had financial resources and was credible. And then they would hire in-house people, quite frankly, so they didn't have to share the wealth with me. So I did that for many, many years. I don't know exactly, but 13 to 14 years, I would participate in a commission or a percentage of the franchise fee, and that was it. And then I'd get a little slice of the royalties. But as I got older and wiser, my proposals changed, and it was, hey, I want equity. And I started getting equity in these companies. And after about my 15th year in the industry, I started getting ownership in some of these brands. And, it allowed me to focus more on just 1 or 2 brands at this time, 1, 2, or 3 brands. And then I brought other people with me to help grow these companies. And that's how I became a little more successful when I had a piece of the action. And I've had a couple exits in my career, and so that helped me along as well. And I got to that point, and then at one point I said, look, now with all my knowledge, I know what not to do. I can do this myself.
Before we get to that portion of the story, and just in front of a break, I want to ask you, how did you get educated to learn? Because you did say once or twice that, you did some really good things really well, and you learned some things along the way. Franchising, as easy it is to get in trouble doing things the wrong way and not being compliant with franchise laws innocently enough, not that it would be malicious, but how would you have gone about learning what to or not to do, or disclosure and all the things that are just the thorns in our sides in franchise development? Where did you go to learn all that?
Well, if you're in it long enough, you understand there's certain things that just you don't do. You don't make financial claims. You don't make any kind of false representations. And quite frankly, I always used to dislike the word broker. It just offended me. Now, there's some great brokers out there, great companies that represent franchisors and things, but I just, early on, it was pounded in my head, this is what we don't do. And I just never did it. I felt good enough about the brands that I work with, was a partner in or was associated with. We didn't have to make financial claims. Okay, either we had an item 19 or we just said, look, talk to our existing franchise family members. They can tell you all you need to know about the financial data on this company, but I never touched it with a 10-foot pole. And still this day, I've never, ever, or anybody I've ever been associated with, my children work in business with me. My son is director of franchising for the company that I own now. And, one of the first things I sat down with him and said, look, we let our franchisees do the talking. We don't need to stress this story because I've seen so many companies get in trouble with this, and it's just something I've never wanted to be a part of. If the brand wasn't good enough to stand on its own and people were not able to get validation from other franchisees, it wasn't meant to be. That's how I've always thought.
Interesting. So when you talked about equity, were you talking about equity inside of the Zoar side of the equation, or were you gaining equity in territory or area development rights? How did all that look?
No, it was having a piece of the actual franchise company. It started out as allowed to get 25%, but up until about 4 years ago, I would normally own 50% of the company because I'm gifted. And every franchisor, it's great you know how to make burgers or make a really good pizza and you've got a good financial track record, but if you don't know how to make it rain, okay, and you don't know how to present properly, which most of these folks don't, you're going nowhere quick. And I believe it takes somebody like me or people like me to present properly and do it the right way and vet the people and make sure they're financially qualified. And just the whole thing that so many of these companies, especially startups, if you're breathing and you have the money today, a lot of franchisors will sign you on. And that's a quick way to failure, in my opinion.
Couldn't agree with you more. Are you able to share some of the brands that you had equity in with us?
Well, some maybe I won't, but over the years, again, I've touched well over 40 concepts. I've either had a percentage of the royalty stream or equity. One company, I'll just tell you a quick story that it's my only regret in business. This was back in 2015, a company called Clean Eats. And it is an absolutely incredible brand. A friend of mine came to me and said, hey, these people need your help. I came in with another friend of mine who was actually a co-founder of the Fuzzy Peach, who cashed out. And we went in and we set up the franchise company. And matter of fact, my former colleague, he's still with the company today. Clean Eats is a strong franchise company. They've got one heck of a AUV. The ownership team is stronger than goat cheese. And at the time when I set up the company, the owners came to me and they basically, at the time, they were new. They had one little location. They said, look, we want you guys to be involved. I could have had 50% of that company. 50% of a company today that has well over 100 locations. Their AUV, I believe, is over $1 million per store. And I passed and I thought, no, I don't want to be involved. I don't know that much about it because I was new in getting the equity position and I passed on it. And that's the only regret I've ever had in my career because that company's worth hundreds of millions of dollars today. But it wasn't meant to be, and I learned a lesson with that company, a couple really good lessons about franchising. And again, I applaud them. They've done it the right way. And the husband and wife owner, they're really great people. And again, their management team is strong, and I admire them more than any brand out there, what they've done, because they're not only helping people build generational wealth, but they've got a great concept. They're selling products that help people. And I'm really proud to be associated or was associated with that company.
You can go this many years and only have one regret in business for a decision you didn't make. You're still pretty much ahead of the game.
Sure.
I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break right here. On the other side of that, let's come back and talk about Peach Cobbler Factory, how it is a guy winds up not once but twice in his illustrious career, doing well, doing good, and doing it all around peaches. So we're talking today with Greg George, CEO and a co-owner of Peach Cobbler Factory. We're going to come back in just a minute and hear more about it. Don't go away.
Franchise Today will be right back, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Franchise Today is brought to you by FRM Solutions, offering the only CRM tool built exclusively for franchising that lets you have it your way. Whether you're a single brand needing professional tools across departments or a portfolio of brands needing franchise-specific CRM across the enterprise, either way, FRM satisfies the needs of many with the power of one. That's right, one single instance of FRM is all it takes across departments or across brands. So if you've had it with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRM, end your frustration today. FRM offers robust dashboarding, tailored reporting, and with open APIs, FRM pushes, pulls, and integrates with other databases, providing you with a single source of truth. Don't just take my word for it. Visit them at frmsolutions.com and order up a demo today. And I'm back with Greg George, president and co-owner of Peach Cobbler Factory. Greg, this brand is something that's on fire, isn't it? A dessert brand on fire doesn't sound like the right thing to be, but you're growing in the dessert space quicker than anybody on the planet, aren't you?
You are correct, Stan.
Well, tell us about this and how you found yourself associated with this brand, which you didn't found and you didn't begin franchising on your own, but you did kind of like a prospector. You found some gold in them hills and you knew it when you saw it. So tell us about it.
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing to light our brand. This concept, it's a phenomenon, is all I can say. I could talk for hours about it, but I'll be brief here. I stumbled on this concept a little over 3 years ago. A friend of mine texted me, my best friend texted me, and the text said, get your A blank blank to Louisville, Kentucky in the morning. And this is my best friend. I just sent back a funny emoji question mark, like I don't even know what he's talking about, but he was my best friend. He didn't respond. I booked a flight, not knowing what I was even going to see. He didn't even know I was coming because I did it on impulse. At the time, I was living on my 55-foot ocean yacht in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and I took a little dinghy to my vehicle. I put on a sport coat. I jumped on a plane. I flew to Louisville, Kentucky in late 2022, and I called him and said, hey, I'm at the airport. You told me to get my blank blank up here. He said, I'll be right there. He came pick me up. It was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He took me to this little strip center. There was a sign on the front of the door. It said, the Peach Cobbler Factory. He said, come on, let's go in. Now, it was about 110 degrees in Louisville. I'll never forget it, in the middle of the summer. And, I'm like, we walked in the place, and there was 20 people standing in line. And I'm like, people were standing in line to buy pie? Because I didn't know what cobbler was. I thought cobbler was pie. And I went in there, and the owners were sitting in the back. They were eating lunch. It was a couple from Nashville, Tennessee. I came to find out later, and they brought the concept to Louisville. I looked at the long line, and I just went right back to them. They didn't know me. I didn't know them. I put my hand out and said, hey, I'm Greg George. Somebody told me about this concept. I came here today, and I said, have you ever thought about franchising? I said, I've never seen a line like this. People buying pies. He said, hey, it's not pies. It's cobbler. There's a big difference. I said, look, I don't have a lot of time. I said, I have a plane to catch, but my friend told me about this concept. Would you want to step next door and talk about it? And I literally walked away from them. They got up from eating. We went right next door to a coffee shop with them. I was with them about 8 minutes. That was it. Because this time I had my confidence. I knew what was going on. I have an eye for things at this point in my career. And I just told them how I worked. I laid it right out to them, said, here's the terms, here's how I operate. I hadn't even tasted a single dessert in place. And I said, look, here's the way I roll. And I called an Uber after 8 minutes. The Uber guy pulled up. I said, guys, I hate to run, but here's the deal. My lawyer's going to send you an LOI. I want to get involved in this company. Something tells me this is it. This is the one. Well, again, I was living on a boat down in Charleston, South Carolina, on the water. I'd lived on my boat for 3 years, actually, at this time. I had a place at the beach in North Carolina, but I was literally finding myself at this point in my life. And so I got an Uber, went to the airport, told my lawyer what to do. He sent him. By the time I landed in Charleston, South Carolina, they had responded to the LOI saying, we got a deal.
Wow.
I hadn't even tried the dessert. And I called my lawyer when I got back in Charleston and said, get me an operating agreement with these terms. I booked a flight, back to Louisville the next morning, sent them an email, said, I'll meet you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the bank. I had my lawyer form a LLC, which still stands today, PCF Franchise LLC. And, buddy, I flew back to Louisville, Kentucky the next day with my checkbook with me, and we signed operating agreements, and I put money in the bank and invested in the concept I knew nothing about. And that's how the company got started. It's been now close to 4 years, 3.5 years I've been involved with the Peach Cobbler Factory.
Now, what kind of radar or instincts or, good God, what is it that without even tasting the product lit up all the lights and told you that this was it?
Well, one thing is the place had a real wonderful atmosphere. That's one thing, the music was right. The color scheme was right. But what I really liked about it, it was unique. It was different. It gave people options. And I hadn't seen choices. I believe people want choices. And I didn't know at the time what cobbler was, but I never heard of a concept that had 12 flavors of cobbler. That was very intriguing to me. Also, I left out that the people, when I met them there for those 8 minutes, one thing they did is they showed me during COVID, they did $1,400,000. And I'm not going to say what their profits were, but it was strong. That's what triggered me to invest in the company. I saw their tax returns. I confirmed all this stuff. I literally did all this in 24 hours. And the numbers were so strong, and they were doing it during COVID. I said, what are they going to do now with my expertise? And I have a gift. I believe I have a gift. I have a gift of identifying things that are unique and different. I never got involved with any tired brands. I don't work with companies that are tired. I like something that's you can take something and turn it into something that's maybe just a dream into a reality. And, I've done it more than once. But I was just attracted to the concept. At the time, I was attracted to the two owners, their story. They started this concept in a city market in Nashville, Tennessee in 2013. They'd had, a brick and mortar, a couple food trucks, and they just elevated. And, at the time, I admired them, and just something was inside me that said, this is the one. I've always told my friends, it just takes one great brand. And I felt like at the time, this was it.
So this is 2021, correct?
2022. 2022, yes.
So, and your one store in Louisville, Kentucky,
That's right.
That was how old then?
It was, because they just moved from Nashville, it was about 11 months at the time. It had been there for 11 months, but at the time they had a 9-year track record.
So how many stores are we today, Greg?
I'm proud to tell you, Stan, we have 112 locations in 22 states, and we're probably open 55 to 60 locations this year.
And how many of those are open and operating now versus under construction or sold but not open?
No. We don't work on what's sold. We work on what's open. We have 112 locations open today in 22 states.
Man, God bless you. That is an amazing, amazing story.
We were named by multiple QSR magazine, various statistics company. We were named 2024. We were the fastest growing dessert chain in America. It's all over the internet. And that's saying a lot when there's the crumbles out there, the insomnia cookies out there. Crumbles up for sale right now for $2 billion. At one time, they had 1,100 locations. But so, I think we've done pretty good so far.
You cracked the Franchise Times top 400, didn't you?
I believe so, yes.
Well, I'll tell you, this is just an amazing story. And it gets even more amazing, and we're going to get into part 2 of this conversation next week. But before we end this week's discussion, we're going to talk about a partnership that you formed with a Facebook friend that just took this like rocket fuel for you in terms of opportunity to scale it. Why don't you tell us about your new partner that came along?
Yeah, well, what happened was 4 or 5 months after I was involved with the original founders, we thought differently. They were really great people. I have nothing bad to say about them. Again, they're incredible people, but I saw a bigger picture. Let's just put it that way. And after 4 or 5 months, and we got a really fast start, I had a gentleman that he was nothing more than a Facebook friend. I didn't really know who he was, didn't know what he did for a living, didn't know anything about him. And by just chance, I saw something online. One of my dear friends said, if it wasn't for this guy, I wouldn't be where I am. And I pushed a button and became his Facebook friend. And he started watching me, started sending me messages, introducing me to some people. I still didn't really know what he did. And then one day he invited me to his home down in South Florida, and I went. I didn't even know the guy. I booked a flight, spent a couple days with him, got to know him a little better, told him the good, the bad, the ugly, and I don't know really what happened, but after our day or two of meeting, I went home. He kind of gave me some challenges to deal with, and I was off, and I'm back in my world again, and shortly after, I get a call from this guy one day. I knew who he was. I already met him. I knew more about him. I knew what he did. I knew what his career was about. But he called me one day, and he basically said, look, I want to be your business partner. I want to build the largest dessert company in the world with you. And it didn't take me too long to say yes to a partnership. And this guy wasn't ordinary, more like extraordinary. He's really only done two things in his life. He has top-level executive, worked directly under Jack Welch for 28 years at General Electric, the largest company in America during the 80s. Everybody knows Jack Welch that knows about business and at our age for sure. And then I believe the day that Jack Welch retired, Larry became chairman and CEO of Albertsons grocery store chain, which today is a $40 billion company. He's a Fortune 50 CEO. He has become my mentor. He has become my best friend. He has become my advisor. He and I are equal partners in PCF Franchise LLC. He's the chairman. I'm the CEO. I speak to him every day, if not twice. The biggest gift I've got from him is a free MBA. I know when I called to kind of check on him, even though I knew he was a straight baller, I called my friend who had worked for him for many years and said, what do you think about this? He said, Greg, you're going to get a free MBA, man. You don't have to pay for it.
You know what I see? I see how there are no coincidences. There's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
I guess that's a really good analogy because he doesn't need this business whatsoever.
But I see what he did with you is what you did with them. You went and saw something and you got a gut instinct that told you this is where you need to be. This is what you should be doing now. This is going to happen. And a Facebook friend that you don't know at the time is Larry Johnston of GE fame and Albertsons CEO and chairman got the taste for you over Facebook and took a leap.
He knew there was more to me. He knew my story, which, we'll talk about on another episode, but he knew I was an overcomer. He knew that I had talent. For him, the first day I met him, the first thing he said to me when I walked in his home, it's all about the people, Greg. And that was the greatest lesson he's given me. And I've learned it the hard way. It's all about the people. Whether it's choosing franchisees, whether it's the staff that you hire, whether it's the vendors you do business with, it is all about the people. And this guy's taught me more in 2.5 years that I've learned in my entire career of any sort, much less franchising. And GE had, I believe, over 10,000 franchisees. My partner, he got Magic Johnson his first Starbucks. I think he has 300 franchises now with Starbucks, but my partner got him that franchise back in the day. So I can't say enough about the guy. I love him. He's just, when I'm up, he calms me down, and when I'm down, he brings me up. And without him, I wouldn't be in the position I am today.
Well, let's put some icing on the cake here, in a manner of speaking. We'll use that parlance in the dessert world that we're talking about. But all of this that occurred and this whole career path that you've rolled out and shared with us during this first half of 2 conversations that we're going to have happened with a monkey on your back, didn't it?
It did, Stan. There's no doubt about it.
And so you told us what has happened in that course of your career, but give the audience a taste of what you were overcoming at the same time. And we're going to come back in part 2 and dive more deeply into that next week.
Well, I'm not embarrassed to share this information at all. I'm actually proud of it. And it's no secret. If you Google my name on the internet, there's articles, there's podcasts, there's all kinds of things about my comeback, so to speak. But a little over 7.5 years ago, I about lost my firstborn son to an 8-year opiate addiction. It destroyed our family. It destroyed our lives. Scared me to death. He had 5 ODs, 3 arrests, looking at some serious legal issues. And it broke me. And what happened was, by the grace of God, I was able to get him in the right place at the right time to help him turn his life around. Well, what happened was, finally got him in a treatment center, a 3-month treatment center. And when I dropped him off there, he weighed 125 pounds, soaking wet. When I returned 3 months later, I couldn't recognize him. He weighed 200 pounds, and I didn't know he was my son. What had happened over that 3-month period in most of my life that not too many people knew, but I was an addict. I was an alcoholic. I was basically high every day of my life for 45 years, either drunk are stoned or on some kind of drug. My father died in my arms at 50 years old. My grandfather died in a bar floor at 50 years old. My family was addicted, and I was in denial about it. But it is the truth, and I'm proud to tell you, Stan, that here just in a little over a month, I'm coming up on being clean and sober for 7 years. And what's happened is my son got clean and sober. He's over 7 years clean and sober. He's actually an executive with my company. The last drink and drug I took was the day I picked my son up from treatment because I didn't know who he was. And it shocked me so bad that I stood in front of 60 or 70 drug addicts and drunk on that day and told them my story and told them when I walked out of that treatment center that day that I would never use drugs or alcohol again, and I have not done that. And I've spent the last almost 7 years helping others that struggle with addiction. Kind of a drug addict whisperer because they look at me, I'm different. I have tattoos and got fancy clothes, and they see a little success, but they also see a guy that maybe looks like he just got out of prison, and they can relate to me and my story. And I've helped a lot of people, and that's my mission. That's my gift. Franchising is just a conduit for me to reach people. I know nobody, Stan. I really don't. But I've got over 300,000 Instagram followers somehow. And I didn't reach out to anybody. They found me, just like my partner found me, just like I found the Peach Cobbler Factory. So I believe it's all from above, in my opinion. I believe the man upstairs is using me as a conduit to help other people. And my focus is on people. And we can talk more about it later, but addictions, it's a terrible disease. And many, many, many folks in the business world suffer from alcoholism and drug addiction. And it's hidden, and it holds people back. And once I gave up drugs and alcohol, my life turned around.
We're going to park on that right here and save that for next week and take a much deeper dive into what it is that you overcame and how you can help others perhaps do the same. But there are no coincidences, Greg. There just are no coincidences. But in your world, I've counted 3, and I don't think we're done yet. So it's just an amazing story, and I'm so happy to have you here to share it.
Well, thank you for having me today, Stan. I really appreciate it.
Greg George, CEO and co-owner of the Peach Cobbler Factory, with just a truly amazing, inspiring story. And we're going to come back next week and tell you some more. And I do think that this is going to be something that's a landmark for us. It's probably the deepest dive we've taken into something that's serious, not just about careers in franchising, but some of the obstacles that may come along with them. And some people would have had a hard time accomplishing what you've done with none of the barriers, and you've done them with those barriers, despite those barriers, and maybe because of those barriers. But we'll talk more about that next week. Greg, thanks again for joining us, and I look forward to the second part of our conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that's a wrap for today. Next week, part 2 of my conversation with Greg George, and some truly sincere expressions from him to help pay it forward for anyone in this audience that may want to take the conversation about business and or personal issues offline with someone who has achieved off-the-chain success in both facets of his life. Until then, I'm Stan Friedman, wishing you the best, the very best of all things franchising, and Franchise Today is out.
Franchise Today is a production of FRM Solutions, providing best-in-class CRM tools to empower relationships with prospective and existing franchisees. Find them online at frmsolutions.com. Join Stan every Wednesday at noon Eastern for another episode of Franchise Today.